Sign the house over to me, Dad, or I'll have you declared mentally unfit. My son, Edward, stood in my kitchen, his voice as precise and devoid of warmth as a scalpel. Legal papers were spread across the solid oak table where I had once helped him build model airplanes. Their sharp, white edges a declaration of war against a lifetime of shared memories. Dr. Edward Westbrook, a celebrated neurosurgeon, a man who had been too busy to visit his dying mother even once during her brutal 8-year war with Alzheimer's, was now demanding I surrender our family home, a historic Philadelphia brownstone valued at $2.8 million. 3 months ago, I had buried my wife, Catherine. On a Tuesday, I stood alone under a cold, indifferent sky, the silence broken only by the hollow sound of earth hitting her casket. Edward had been unable to attend her funeral, a scheduling conflict with a medical conference in Hawaii. He'd claimed he had been too busy to mourn the woman who had worked 2 jobs to fund his path through Harvard Medical School. Now, he was back, armed with his wife Victoria's predatory legal strategy and his own medical degree. Both of them weaponized against his grieving father. I should have broken. I should have wept, or raged, or pleaded. I should have been the confused, helpless old man they so clearly, so contemptuously, expected me to be. Instead, I smiled, a thin, cold expression that didn't reach my eyes. The kind of smile you see on a chess player who has just seen a checkmate in 12 moves. Let me get you something first, son, I said quietly, and walked into my study. What I brought back wasn't a pen or a deed. It was a meticulously organized portfolio that would systematically dismantle their careers, their reputations, and the entire architecture of their carefully constructed lives. Because for the 8 years they had been building their perfect, prestigious world, I had been quietly, methodically, building a case. Before I reveal the contents of that portfolio, let me ask you a question. Have you ever been underestimated by the very people who should know you best? Tell me about it in the comments below. And if you believe that justice is a dish best served cold, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because the story I'm about to tell is a masterclass in calculated, righteous revenge. I remember the exact moment the world fractured. The precise instant the foundation of my life cracked beyond repair. October 15, 2016. Catherine. My brilliant, vibrant Catherine. A woman who could recite entire passages of Shakespeare from memory and debate the merits of Renaissance art with fiery passion. Had been forgetting little things, car keys, appointments, the name of her favorite poet. When Dr. Susan Chen at Pennsylvania Hospital spoke the words, "early onset Alzheimer's," I felt the tectonic plates of my life shift and crack apart. I was an architect, a man who had spent his life understanding structures, foundations, and the slow, insidious nature of decay. And now, the most beautiful structure I had ever known, the architecture of my wife's mind, was being systematically unbuilt. Edward, or Teddy as we'd always called him, was finishing his neurosurgical residency at Harvard then. He had married Victoria, a ruthlessly ambitious mergers and acquisitions lawyer. 2 years earlier, Victoria had never been warm. She was polished, analytical, and had grown up in a world of inherited wealth on the main line where family was viewed as a series of strategic alliances, not a source of unconditional love. She often remarked that emotional drama was too complicated and unproductive. When I called Teddy that afternoon, my voice trembling with the aftershocks of the diagnosis, he promised to drive down from their Cambridge apartment that weekend. "We'll face this together, Dad," he'd said, and for a foolish moment, I believed him. But the next day, he called back, his tone different, cooler, more distant, as if he were reading from a script. "Dad, Victoria and I have been talking. She thinks it's better if we let the professionals handle this. She's worried about the exposure, the emotional toll. She feels it's important for me to maintain a certain professional distance to protect my focus at the hospital. That was the first shot fired in what would become an 8-year siege. A campaign of orchestrated abandonment directed by Victoria and executed by my own son. The bills began almost immediately. An avalanche of expenses for the specialized in-home care Catherine deserved. $23,000 a month. I had been a partner at a successful architectural firm. A comfortable life, but not one equipped for this kind of financial onslaught. The math was simple and brutal. I couldn't manage a demanding career and be a full-time caregiver. So I chose her. On November 3, 2016, I announced my retirement. 34 years of designing, building, and creating, my pension, my partnerships, the life of the mind I had so cherished, all of it gone. I became Catherine's world, her memory, her anchor in a terrifying, receding tide. That first year, I called my son 127 times. I kept a log, a meticulous accounting of my unanswered pleas. He returned perhaps 20 of those calls. Always rushed, always sounding apologetic, but with Victoria's sharp, coaching voice often audible in the background. "Dad, I want to help, but Victoria thinks it's better if we maintain some boundaries. She says it will be less confusing for Mom if we don't visit irregularly." Boundaries. That became Victoria's favorite word. It was a sterile, legal term she used to build a wall around my son. Brick by insidious brick. In one of the rare calls Teddy answered in 2018, I could hear the raw tension in his voice. "Dad, I'm ashamed seeing Mom like this. I remember her being so strong, so brilliant, and now, Victoria says I should focus on our future, on building our life, instead of dwelling on the past." "Teddy, she's not the past," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "She's your mother, and she's still here." "I know, Dad, but it's just hard." Thanksgiving, 2017. I set 3 places at our dining room table. A foolish act of hope against the mounting evidence of my son's desertion. Catherine wore her best dress. The sapphire blue one Teddy had always said made her eyes sparkle. She was having a good day. A pocket of lucidity in the encroaching fog. "When is Teddy coming?" she asked every 10 minutes. Her face bright with anticipation. His text message arrived at 4:30 p.m. just as the turkey was coming out of the oven. "Sorry, Dad, Victoria planned something last minute. Give Mom my love." I found out later, from Victoria's meticulously curated Instagram feed, that their last-minute something was a 5-star getaway to a luxury resort in Miami. Her caption, under a photo of them toasting with champagne, read, "Escaping the family drama to enjoy real life. #grateful #no stress." When I confronted my son about it, he was defensive, his words a parrot of his wife's philosophy. "Dad, Victoria didn't want me to come back while Mom was unstable. She said it would affect my career focus, my ability to perform in the OR." By 2019, Catherine's condition had worsened significantly. She would drift in and out of the present, her mind a beautiful, shattered mosaic. In one of the few video calls Teddy attempted that year, she looked at him with a heartbreaking clarity and asked about her grandchildren, children that had never existed. Because Victoria, as she'd once put it, wasn't ready to bring children into a situation with so much family instability. Teddy cut the call short when Catherine repeated the question, her voice full of confusion and longing. His excuse later was a dagger to my heart. "Dad, I don't want Victoria to see you like this. She thinks it's better to maintain a distance. To avoid the heartbreak." Whose heartbreak? I wondered. His or hers? The medical bills kept climbing. A relentless avalanche of expenses for home health aides, physical therapy, new medications. I refinanced our home. Not once, but twice. I burned through our retirement savings. The nest egg we had so carefully built for a future that would never come. When I sent Teddy copies of the major medical bills, a desperate, silent plea for help, his responses were clinical and detached. Dad, have you looked into state assistance programs? Victoria researched some options online. State assistance. For his mother, the woman who had worked nights as a nurse to help pay for his medical school applications. Christmas 2020 was a new level of devastation. Catherine had been asking for Teddy for weeks, her mind clinging to the idea of one last Christmas with her boy. I decorated the house exactly as she used to. A desperate attempt to lure a miracle. I called Teddy on Christmas Eve, my voice thick with unshed tears. Son, your mother is having a really hard time. She keeps asking for you. Could you just drive down for one day? An hour? The silence on the other end of the line was a cold, empty space. Dad, Victoria booked us a ski trip to St. Moritz. She says I need to stop enabling your emotional dependency and focus on our marriage. Victoria's Instagram that night was a spectacle of alpine luxury. Champagne toasts in a 5-star ski lodge. Designer skiwear. Beaming smiles. Her caption. Finally learned to put our relationship first. #boundaries #self-care. The recording started in 2021. I bought a simple digital voice recorder and a series of notebooks. I documented everything. The dates and times of my calls. The excuses. The sound of Catherine's quiet weeping when Teddy didn't come. In one particularly painful call from 2022, a crack appeared in my son's carefully constructed wall of detachment. His guilt finally bled through. Dad, I know I should visit more, but every time I even think about coming, Victoria reminds me how toxic the situation is. She says watching Mom deteriorate isn't good for my mental health. What about your mother's mental health? Teddy? I asked, my voice raw. I know, Dad, but Victoria says professionals can handle it better than family. In May of 2022, Edward missed Catherine's 65th birthday for a couples wellness retreat Victoria had planned. In January of 2023, when Catherine fell and broke her hip, I spent 3 nights sleeping in a chair in her hospital room. Edward sent flowers with a card signed by them both. Thinking of you both, Edward and Victoria. Victoria, who had never once met the woman whose son she had married and systematically isolated. By Catherine's final year, she had stopped eating regularly. She was a fragile whisper of the woman she had once been. In her rare lucid moments, she would look toward the front door with a heartbreaking, unquenchable hope. Where's my boy? I just want to see my boy. The last voicemail I left for him was on February 10, 2024. Teddy, your mother is dying. The doctors say it's a matter of days, maybe hours. She's been asking for you constantly. Please, son, please come home. He called back 3 days later. Dad, I'm so sorry I missed your call. Victoria and I were at a neurosurgical conference in Orlando. How's Mom doing? She died yesterday. Teddy, I said, the words feeling like shards of glass in my mouth. Your mother died yesterday. The silence stretched for an eternity. Oh, God, Dad, Victoria said it wasn't that serious yet. Why didn't you make it clearer? 563 missed calls over 8 years said otherwise. He couldn't make the funeral either. The excuse, delivered in a choked, guilty whisper, was the most damning of all. Victoria thinks it would be too traumatic for me. given my guilt over not visiting more. I buried my wife of 42 years alone, surrounded by the quiet, supportive presence of neighbors who had watched me fight this battle without the help of my own son. And that's when I knew exactly what I had to do. 3 weeks after Catherine's funeral, my son called, not to check on me, not to share a memory of his mother, but to discuss what Victoria had termed my property management crisis. I was sitting in Catherine's chair, the burgundy recliner where she had spent her final months. Her reading glasses were still on the side table, her crossword puzzle book half finished. "Dad, Victoria and I have been talking about your situation." Those were his opening words. Not, "How are you holding up?" but a clinical assessment, delivered with his wife's authority. "I'm grieving, Edward," I said. "That's what happens when you lose your wife." "It's been 3 weeks, Dad." Victoria did some research. She says prolonged grief can indicate cognitive decline, especially in men your age. She thinks we need to take action. Action. Victoria had been researching me like a hostile takeover. I'm 64 years old, not 94. Age isn't the only factor. Dad, Victoria pointed out that the stress of caregiving, the financial strain, the isolation, these things damage executive function. She's concerned about your ability to make sound decisions. I quietly pressed the record button on my phone. "What kind of decisions are you and Victoria worried about, son?" "Well, for starters, you're sitting on nearly $3 million in real estate while drowning in medical debt." Victoria ran the numbers. "That house is worth $2.8 million. Dad, she says you could downsize, clear your debts, set yourself up properly." Victoria had done her homework. Property values, my financial vulnerability, the most efficient extraction method. "This house is my home, Edward. It's where your mother and I built our life." And that's exactly the kind of emotional thinking that concerns Victoria. "You're not being rational, Dad. You're letting sentiment override financial logic." Sentiment. She was calling my love for his mother sentiment. And he was parroting her words. "Your mother died in this house, Edward, in our bedroom, holding my hand. You think I should just sell that away?" "Dad, Mom is gone." Victoria says clinging to physical spaces isn't healthy. It's a symptom of complicated grief that can progress to serious cognitive issues if left untreated. Every word sounded rehearsed. "Are you saying you think I'm mentally incompetent?" "I'm saying Victoria thinks you're showing signs of impaired judgment. And as a doctor, I have to agree. The responsible thing to do would be to transfer the property into competent hands before you make irreversible mistakes." "Competent hands? You mean yours and Victoria's?" "Dad, Victoria has a law degree and financial planning experience. I'm a neurosurgeon. We understand asset management better than someone in your emotional state." The recording was capturing everything. "So what, exactly, are you proposing?" "Sign the house over to us. Victoria will set up a trust. Make sure you get the psychiatric care you clearly need. You can keep living there, of course, under proper supervision." Supervision, like I was a patient. "And if I refuse?" The pause was telling. "Dad, Victoria researched the legal requirements. As a medical professional, I would be obligated to report suspected cognitive decline in an elderly parent, especially one who has demonstrated poor judgment regarding their finances and self-care." "You're saying you'd have me declared mentally incompetent?" "Victoria thinks we should have you properly evaluated first. If they determine you can't manage your affairs safely, then yes, guardianship proceedings might be necessary." Guardianship. The legal endgame. "Edward, I took care of your mother for 8 years while you were building your career. I managed everything. And now you think I'm incompetent?" That's exactly Victoria's point. Dad, she says the stress of caregiving has clearly affected your cognitive function. You're not the same person you were 8 years ago. We can't ignore that. He was right about one thing. I wasn't the same person. But not in the way they thought. I need time to think. I said. Of course. But Dad, Victoria says not to take too long. She's concerned that every day you delay getting help, your condition could deteriorate further. My condition. She had diagnosed me through him, found me guilty of grief, and prescribed the theft of my home as the only cure. I hung up and stopped the recording. 24 minutes of my son systematically dismantling my competence, all under his wife's direction. I sat in Catherine's chair for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called David Chen, the lawyer who had handled our estate planning for 20 years. David, I said, it's Thomas Westbrook. I need to discuss an urgent legal matter regarding my son and his wife. The war Victoria had started was about to end very differently than she had ever planned. David Chen's office, with its walls of leather-bound books and quiet, scholarly air, felt like a sanctuary of reason in a world that had gone mad. Thomas, I'm so deeply sorry for your loss, he said, his voice full of genuine warmth. Catherine was a remarkable woman. Thank you, David. She always said you were the only lawyer who could make estate planning sound like a fascinating history lesson. I placed my phone on his polished mahogany desk and hit play. For 24 agonizing minutes, we listened to Edward and Victoria's coordinated assault on my sanity. David's expression shifted from concern to disbelief, and finally to a cold, controlled anger. My God, Thomas, he said when it was over. This isn't just elder abuse. It's a calculated legal and medical conspiracy. Your daughter-in-law has clearly researched guardianship law down to the letter, while your son provides the veneer of medical justification. Can they actually succeed? They can try, but it would require multiple, independent medical evaluations, court hearings, and substantial, irrefutable evidence of cognitive impairment. Victoria's legal background gives her dangerous knowledge, but from what I've observed of you over the years, their case would be exceedingly difficult to prove. A sliver of the tension in my shoulders eased. What are my options? David opened a fresh legal pad. We could wait for them to make a move and then defend against it. But given their coordination, I would recommend we go on the offensive. We document everything. We build a comprehensive, bulletproof record of their behavior. And we consider protecting your assets before they even have a chance to challenge your competence. I thought of the 8 years of evidence sitting in my study, the call logs, the broken promises, the documented, systematic abandonment, all while Victoria actively encouraged and rationalized my son's absence. David, I said slowly, what if I told you I have 8 years of evidence showing my son abandoned his dying mother? Entirely at his wife's direction? Phone records, voicemails, financial documents proving I handled everything alone while Victoria kept him away for his mental health. David's pen stopped moving. He looked up, his eyes sharp. That would be devastating to their credibility in any legal proceeding. Elder abandonment orchestrated by a lawyer spouse, using a neurosurgeon husband as the instrument? That's career-ending territory, for both of them. And what if I wanted to sell the house? It's completely your right, though if you're considering what I think you're considering. I had been mulling this over since Catherine's funeral. The house, our beautiful, empty house, felt more like a mausoleum than a home. But more importantly, I had come to a quiet, powerful realization. My son was right about one thing. I wasn't the same person I'd been 8 years ago. I was stronger, I was colder, and I was done being manipulated. I want to sell the house. David, to the Alzheimer's Research Foundation. Catherine always said that if her suffering could help prevent other families from going through this hell, it would give her illness a purpose. David's eyes widened. Thomas, that's a $2.8 million donation. Are you absolutely certain? I've never been more certain of anything in my life. And Edward and Victoria? I smiled. A grim, humorless expression. They can find out with the rest of the world. We spent the next 2 hours working through the intricate details. The house would be transferred to the Alzheimer's Research Foundation at fair market value. The proceeds used to fund a new, state-of-the-art research wing in Catherine Westbrook's name. I would retain residence rights for 1 year while I figured out my next steps. There's one more thing, I said as we finished the paperwork. I want Edward and Victoria to learn about this sale in a very specific, very public way, and I explained my plan. David listened with a growing look of amazement, which slowly morphed into a grim smile. Thomas, he said, it's certainly poetic justice, but are you prepared for the public nature of this confrontation? David, Victoria researched how to steal my house using my son's medical degree as leverage. Edward threatened to have me declared incompetent so they could inherit a property I was supposedly too mentally ill to manage. I think a little public accountability is exactly what they both deserve. He nodded slowly. Victoria's legal career could be seriously damaged by this kind of exposure. Good, I said. She spent 8 years keeping a son from his dying mother, and then tried to steal from his grieving father. Her career deserves to be damaged. I signed the papers, transferring ownership of my life's memories to the foundation. Effective in 30 days, the public announcement would be made at the hospital's annual fundraising gala. A glittering, high-profile event that Edward never missed. It was the perfect venue for networking with wealthy potential patients, while Victoria worked the room for potential legal contacts. One last question, Thomas, David said as I prepared to leave. Are you prepared for the possibility that this destroys your relationship with Edward permanently? I considered that for a long moment, the weight of it settling in my chest. David, my relationship with my son was destroyed 8 years ago. The day he chose his wife's comfort over his mother's love. I'm just making that destruction official. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, clarity. A cold, clean sense of purpose. Catherine would have supported this. She had always believed in fighting for what was right, especially when it was difficult. That evening, I began the final stage of my operation, organizing 8 years of evidence into a narrative so damning, so irrefutable, that it would leave no doubt in anyone's mind. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and Victoria's legal expertise was about to be turned against her in ways she had never, in her wildest, most arrogant dreams, anticipated. The room that had once been Catherine's sewing room, a place of creativity and light, became my war room. I covered every surface with 8 years of documentation, organizing it not as a father's scrapbook of pain, but as a prosecutor's case file. The central pillar of my case was the archive of voicemails from my old phone. I had kept every single message, unable to bring myself to press delete. Now I understood why. The earliest recording, from November 2016, a month after the diagnosis. Hey Dad. Edward here. Victoria and I talked, and she thinks it's better if we don't visit regularly. She says inconsistent contact might confuse Mom more. We'll check in by phone instead. Even then, it was Victoria thinks. Victoria says. I spent 3 days creating a meticulous timeline. A diptych of deceit. On one side, Edward's recorded excuses, on the other, Victoria's corresponding Instagram posts. Christmas 2019. Edward's voicemail. Victoria planned a wellness retreat for my mental health. She's worried about my depression over mom's condition. On the screen next to the transcript, Victoria's post from that same day. A photo of them on a sun-drenched beach. Caption: sometimes you have to choose your own happiness over family drama. Hashtag self-care, hashtag boundaries work. The hospital visitor logs were a brutal, silent testament. During Catherine's 6 hospitalizations, my name appeared 43 times. Our home health aide, Maria, visited 7 times. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, brought flowers twice. Edward's name, 0 entries. But Victoria's social media was a detailed travelogue of their activities during Catherine's medical crises. Wine tastings in Napa while his mother was on a ventilator. A gallery opening in New York while she was recovering from a fall. But I needed to understand their vulnerabilities beyond just the raw data of their abandonment. So I researched them the way they had researched me. Victoria was a rising star at Morrison, Blake and Associates, a prestigious firm specializing in corporate law and estate planning. Her firm's website was a monument to hypocrisy, full of talk about family values and ethical excellence. Several recent blog posts highlighted their pro bono work with elder care advocacy groups. Edward's hospital profile emphasized his compassionate patient care and a family-centered approach to medicine. His department had recently launched a caregiver support initiative for families dealing with chronic illness. The irony was a physical weight in my chest. I started making strategic phone calls. First, to Dr. Susan Chen, Catherine's neurologist. Mr. Westbrook, she said, I've been thinking about you. In 8 years of treating your wife, I met Edward exactly once. I remember asking about family support, and he said his wife thought professional distance was healthier. Your wife's file shows you attended every appointment, every emergency. The absence of her son, especially given his medical background, was notable. If you need a statement to protect yourself from what sounds like a monstrous combination of medical and legal coercion, you will have it. Next, I called my old friend, retired Fire Chief Mike Anderson. I explained the situation. His reaction was immediate and profane. That manipulative little, sorry, Thomas. But I remember when you retired to care for Catherine. Victoria came to your retirement party briefly. Spent the whole time checking her phone and complaining about the depressing atmosphere. Edward barely stayed 10 minutes. Half the department remembers how proud you were of his career. How you always made excuses for why he couldn't visit. We all knew something was wrong. Character witnesses mounted quickly. Our family doctor, our financial advisor, our neighbors, all were shocked by the coordinated nature of Edward and Victoria's scheme. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, knocked on my door on a Thursday evening. Thomas, I hope you don't mind, but I was so worried after that incident with the real estate agent. I did some research on your daughter-in-law. What kind of research? My nephew works in the IT department at Morrison, Blake and Associates. He says Victoria has been bragging to her colleagues for weeks about coming into a significant family inheritance soon. She's already been shopping for houses in the Hamptons, telling people her husband's father is finally being realistic about his limitations. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. This wasn't just about the house. Victoria had been planning and bragging about stealing from me while I was still deep in the fog of my grief. Thomas, Mrs. Gable continued, her voice low. It's worse than that. She apparently sent emails about it. My nephew says the firm's internal communication system flags potential conflicts of interest when lawyers inherit property through family legal actions. Her name came up. On Friday evening, I called Edward. It was time to let him think he was winning. Son, I said, my voice deliberately frail. I've been thinking about what you and Victoria said. About the house. About my mental state. I could hear the relief flood his voice. I'm glad you're being rational about this. Dad. I'm scared. Edward. Maybe Victoria is right. Maybe I'm not thinking clearly anymore. It's okay. Dad. Victoria has already contacted some estate planning specialists. We're going to take care of everything. Of course she had. She's confident we can have everything transferred smoothly. When do you want to move forward? Soon. Dad. Victoria says the longer we wait, the more opportunity there is for you to make mistakes that could complicate the legal process. Okay, son. Whatever you and Victoria think is best. After I hung up, I sat in Catherine's chair and smiled. They thought they had won. Edward was probably on the phone with Victoria right now, telling her about my surrender. She was probably already planning how to spend my money. They had no idea that every conversation was being recorded, every threat documented, and every piece of evidence organized for maximum public impact. The trap was set. Now, I just had to wait for them to walk into it at the hospital fundraising gala, where their colleagues, their mentors, and their entire professional world would bear witness to their complete and utter destruction. What do you believe is more unforgivable, Edward's abandonment of his mother, or Victoria's manipulation of her husband to achieve her goals? It's a tough question, and I'd be interested to hear your perspective in the comments. And if you're finding value in this story, please consider hitting that like button. It truly helps. The night of the Pennsylvania Hospital fundraising gala was a grand affair. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and the clinking of champagne glasses. I dressed carefully for the occasion, choosing my best navy suit, the one Catherine had bought me for our 40th anniversary. The irony that I was wearing it to defend her memory against our own son was not lost on me. David Chen, my lawyer, had arranged everything perfectly. Local news cameras were discreetly positioned at the back of the room. The hospital's entire board of trustees sat in the front rows, along with department heads and senior medical staff. I spotted Edward and Victoria immediately. They were seated at a prime table with the chief of neurosurgery, Dr. Michael Thompson. Victoria, in a stunning but severe designer gown, looked completely composed, laughing and networking as if this were just another social conquest. Edward looked nervous, constantly adjusting his tie, but Victoria's presence seemed to steady him. Several attorneys from Morrison, Blake and Associates were also in attendance, Victoria's colleagues, no doubt curious about the family inheritance case she had been so openly discussing. A hospital board member introduced me warmly, her voice full of emotion as she spoke of my career as a celebrated architect and my extraordinary and heroic dedication as a caregiver during my wife's 8-year battle with Alzheimer's. I stepped to the podium and looked out at the sea of faces, over 400 people. Mostly medical and legal professionals who understood both the devastating cost of Alzheimer's and the sacred importance of family support. Thank you all for coming. I began, my voice steady. My name is Thomas Westbrook. 3 months ago, I lost my wife, Catherine, to Alzheimer's disease after an 8-year battle that I fought, for the most part, alone. Today, in her memory, I am announcing a $2.8 million donation to establish the Catherine Westbrook Memorial Research Wing at this hospital. A wave of applause filled the room. I saw Edward's face register shock, then a flicker of confusion, quickly masked. Victoria's expression remained perfectly controlled, but her eyes had sharpened with a lawyer's calculation. She was undoubtedly running the numbers, wondering how this grand gesture would affect their inheritance plans. This donation represents the entire proceeds from the sale of our family home. I continued, the house where Catherine and I built our life together, where we raised our son, Edward. and where she passed away peacefully in my arms. I gestured toward my son. Several of his colleagues smiled warmly at him, assuming this was a proud, poignant family moment. But this donation is about more than just funding research. It's about honoring the true caregivers, the husbands, the wives, the children, who sacrifice everything for their loved ones, often without recognition or support. Dr. Thompson nodded approvingly. This was exactly the kind of message the medical community embraced. The room grew quiet, sensing a shift in my tone. Unfortunately, I said, my voice hardening slightly, not everyone understands this sacred responsibility. Some people believe that their professional credentials can substitute for personal commitment. Others use their legal expertise to justify and orchestrate abandonment. Victoria's composure cracked. Just for a second, a muscle in her jaw tightened. She was beginning to understand that this was not the ceremony she had expected. 3 weeks after my wife's funeral, my son, Dr. Edward Westbrook, and his wife, Victoria Westbrook, an attorney at Morrison, Blake and Associates, contacted me to discuss my mental competence. They suggested that my grief was a symptom of cognitive impairment. They recommended that I sign over my home to them, for my own protection. A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. Dr. Thompson's expression shifted from warm approval to one of serious, professional concern. Victoria's colleagues were no longer smiling, they were watching her intently. My son felt that as a neurosurgeon, he was qualified to diagnose my mental state over a single phone call. His wife, as a practicing attorney, had already researched the legal requirements for having me declared mentally incompetent. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. I'd like to share a small part of their coordinated plan with you all. Edward started to rise from his chair, his face pale. Dad, this isn't appropriate. Please. Dr. Westbrook, Dr. Chen, the hospital's chief of staff, interrupted, her voice firm and clear. Let your father finish. I pressed play. Edward's recorded voice filled the grand ballroom, clinical and cold, with Victoria's influence evident in every calculated phrase. Dad, Victoria thinks you're showing signs of impaired judgment. The responsible thing would be to transfer the property into competent hands. Victoria has a law degree and financial planning experience. I'm a doctor. We understand asset management better than someone in your emotional state. Victoria's voice could then be heard. A sharp whisper from the background of the recording. Tell him about the legal options. Edward, remind him about guardianship proceedings. The recording continued for 3 excruciating minutes. When it ended, the silence in the room was deafening. It was a silence filled with shock, and judgment, and the dawning realization of a profound betrayal. Victoria's colleagues were staring at her with undisguised horror. Now, I continued, my voice ringing with a cold authority. I'd like to provide some context for their professional assessment of my competence. I opened the portfolio I had placed on the podium. During my wife's 8-year illness, I called my son 563 times. He returned 97 of those calls, a response rate of 17%. However, the real story is in the voicemails he left. I pressed play again. Edward's voice from 2017. Dad, Victoria researched Alzheimer's care. She thinks family visits during the early stages can actually increase confusion. Then, displayed on the large screen behind me, was Victoria's Instagram post from that same week. A photo of them at a beach resort. Sometimes you have to choose your own happiness over family drama. #boundaries work. A collective gasp echoed through the room. Dr. Thompson was now writing furiously on a notepad. Over 8 years, my wife was hospitalized 6 times. These hospital visitor logs show that I was present for every admission. Every procedure, every consultation. They also show that Dr. Edward Westbrook visited his dying mother exactly 0 times. Several people turned to stare directly at my son. His face was a mask of crimson shame. But Victoria remained defiant, her lawyer's training keeping her composed under the brutal fire. The financial cost of my wife's care totaled over $563,000. I paid every penny, liquidating my retirement and refinancing my home twice. During this time, Dr. Westbrook and his wife posted frequently about their luxury vacations and designer purchases. I clicked the remote, and a slideshow of Victoria's Instagram posts filled the screen. This wine tasting in Napa was posted while my wife was in the ICU with pneumonia. This designer shopping spree in Paris was during the weekend she broke her hip. Victoria's colleagues were now openly staring at her. One of them, a senior partner, was already on his phone, his face a grim mask. But perhaps most telling is how Mrs. Westbrook orchestrated this abandonment using her legal expertise. I played another recording, this one of Victoria's voice coaching Edward in the background of a call. Your dad is manipulating you with guilt. My research shows that prolonged exposure to dementia patients causes secondary trauma. We need to maintain complete space until she's stabilized. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Victoria shot to her feet. This is a violation of my privacy. Those recordings were made without my consent. Actually, Mrs. Westbrook, David Chen's calm, authoritative voice came from the back of the room, where he had been standing quietly. In the state of Pennsylvania, single-party consent applies to the recording of telephone conversations. Your husband consented by participating in the calls. David had arrived as my backup. And Victoria's face went white as she recognized the legal trap she had just walked into. Furthermore, I continued, my voice rising to a crescendo. Mrs. Westbrook spent 8 years convincing my son that abandoning his dying mother was a form of self-care. All while she researched how to steal from his grieving father. When my wife was dying, I left my son a voicemail explaining she had only days to live. He called back 3 days later to learn she had already passed. His excuse? Victoria had convinced him that his mother's death wasn't imminent enough to interrupt their vacation. Dr. Chen was staring at Edward with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. Dr. Westbrook, is this accurate? My son's voice was barely a whisper. Dad, Victoria thought. Dr. Westbrook. Dr. Thompson interrupted, standing up, his face a thundercloud. I think we need to discuss your employment status. My office. Now. Victoria finally lost her composure completely. This is character assassination. He's clearly having a mental breakdown and making up stories. Mrs. Westbrook, one of her senior partners, called out from his table, his voice cold as ice. Perhaps you should stop talking. You're making this worse. I'm finishing now, I said calmly, looking out at the stunned faces. The Catherine Westbrook Memorial Research Wing will open next year, funded by the home where she spent her final years surrounded by the people who actually cared about her. Thank you. The applause was scattered and uncertain at first, then grew in volume. Several people approached me afterward, their hands outstretched, their voices full of support and condolences. As I headed for the exit, Victoria cornered me in the hallway. Her professional mask finally shattered, her face a contorted mask of rage. You've destroyed us, she hissed. Edward's career, my practice. No, Victoria, I said, looking her directly in the eye. You destroyed yourselves. I just documented it. Edward appeared beside her, his face streaked with tears, the first I had seen in 8 years. Dad, I'm sorry, he choked out. Victoria, she convinced me that staying away was better for everyone. I was too ashamed, too weak to see Mom deteriorating. It's too late for apologies. Edward. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, was waiting for me in the parking lot, her own eyes filled with tears. She took my hand. Thomas, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Catherine would be so proud. You honored her memory. You stood up for yourself. And for the first time in months, I felt a profound, quiet sense of peace. 6 months later, I stood in the newly dedicated Catherine Westbrook Memorial Research Wing, watching a team of young, brilliant scientists install the final piece of equipment, the gleaming laboratory, a beacon of hope against a terrible disease, stretched across 3,000 square feet, funded entirely by the sale of our home. Dr. Susan Chen, who had been appointed the wing's director, found me there that morning, reviewing the dedication plaque. Thomas, this is remarkable, she said, her voice full of emotion. Catherine would be overwhelmed by what you've accomplished. She always said that if her suffering could help other families, it would give her illness a purpose. I replied. The aftermath of that night had been swift and comprehensive. Dr. Michael Thompson suspended Edward pending a full medical board review. The hospital's ethics committee launched a formal investigation into his abandonment of family responsibilities while using his medical authority for personal gain. Victoria's legal career imploded even faster. Morrison, Blake and Associates terminated her partnership the day after the gala, citing gross ethical misconduct. Her professional reputation was destroyed overnight. No reputable law firm wanted to be associated with an attorney who had orchestrated elder abandonment and attempted financial elder abuse. But the most unexpected consequence came 2 months after the announcement. Edward called me on a Tuesday evening, his voice broken and hollow. Dad, Victoria left me. She said the scandal destroyed her career and she couldn't be married to someone who let his father humiliate her so publicly. I felt a flicker of something, not quite sympathy, but a quiet recognition of his pain. Dad, he continued, his voice choked with a sob. I realize now how much she influenced every decision I made. I was so ashamed of seeing Mom deteriorate. And Victoria, she made it so easy to stay away, to pretend it wasn't happening. I know it's too late, but I am so sorry. Edward, I said, the words heavy with the weight of 8 years of pain. Your mother died asking for you. That can't be undone. I know, but Dad, could we maybe try to rebuild something? I want to volunteer at the research wing. I want to help other families avoid what happened to us. I considered his request carefully. The research wing needed volunteers, and Edward's medical background could be valuable. But trust, once shattered into a million pieces, required time and effort to rebuild. Edward, we can start with the volunteer work, but our relationship, if there ever is one again, it will be earned, not inherited. I understand, Dad, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I'll do whatever it takes. I moved into a comfortable apartment in the city, within walking distance of the hospital where I now worked as a volunteer patient advocate, helping families navigate the terrifying labyrinth of Alzheimer's care. The Catherine Westbrook Memorial Research Wing recently published its first promising results in a new drug therapy that might slow the progression of the disease. The story of what happened at the gala became something of a legend in the Philadelphia medical and legal communities, a cautionary tale about the perils of professional arrogance and the quiet strength of a grieving father. My son, Edward, began his long, slow journey toward redemption. He was a faithful volunteer at the research wing, his work humble and sincere. He started a support group for the children of Alzheimer's patients, sharing his own painful story as a warning to others. Our relationship is not what it once was. The scars are too deep for that. But it is a relationship built on a new foundation of honesty and earned respect. We talk. We share a quiet meal once a week. It is a start. I learned a powerful lesson through this ordeal. A legacy is not a house or a bank account. It's not something you pass down. It's the impact you have on the world. The good you put out that continues to ripple long after you're gone. By sacrificing our home, I didn't just fund a laboratory. I transformed my personal tragedy into a public good. I honored my wife's memory not by clinging to the physical space where she died, but by using it to fuel the fight against the disease that took her. Some boundaries, once established, protect what matters most. Others, carefully and painfully reconstructed, might just offer the hope of redemption. Justice, I've found, isn't always about punishment. Sometimes, it's about correction. It's about taking the broken pieces of your life and building something new. Something stronger. Something that will stand as a testament not to what you lost, but to what you chose to create in its place. Thank you for joining me on this very personal journey. If you've ever had to fight for what's right in your own family, please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please honor Catherine's memory by liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories of resilience and the enduring power of the human spirit.